Is it possible to obtain the hitchhiker effect digitally if you were just reading about it, or something to that nature?
Well, a lot of anecdotal emails and texts that we've got over, since the book was published, saying exactly that. I was reading the book, and suddenly there were sort of paranormal events that were happening around me in the next 24 hours. But there's a lot of anecdotal sort of reports like that. But ultimately, this has to be studied in a completely rigorous, comprehensive way. And the data that OSAP gathered with all of the different individuals on the ranch, and that some individuals off the ranch who are bringing stuff home with them, and then having all of these bizarre paranormal events erupting around them. You could talk about there's something, on somebody's shoulder that's manipulating their perception. You could also talk about the brain as a filtering device, which goes all the way back to William James over 100 years ago. So on Aldous Huxley and all of the more recent theories regarding how the brain and consciousness are linked. All of that stuff is right in the target of a very, very substantial research project if it ever gets off the ground. Now, I'm encouraged by the original language associated with the that's still in the National Defense Authorization Act regarding effects of UFOs on people. Because once you start opening that door, you get into medical effects, and then you get into psychological effects, and then you get into paranormal effects. I mean, there's a sort of an unbroken chain that OSAP discovered. And anybody who's looking at effects of UFOs on people, and that are not just confining themselves to sensor-driven data, will inevitably stumble upon this whole thing. And the hitchhiker effect falls out of that unbroken chain. So I am partially optimistic that eventually this whole series of data that OSAP uncovered will be uncovered in a future program. But it's not going to happen next year or the year after. I think there's a lot of resistance, as we were talking about earlier, even to the nuts and bolts aspect of this program ever seeing the light of day. So whether or not it actually survives the Air Force and OUSDI, but inevitably, if this study is undertaken in any way, a rigorous way, and medical effects are included, ultimately this whole hitchhiker effect will have to be addressed.
I would add this is that, it's weird stuff, James. Obviously, it's weird. And, we've taken all kinds of crap as a result. OSAP, once it started sending these reports about things that were happening at the ranch, things that were happening to investigators, they start taking crap as well. It's too darn weird. We put out our book, and oh my gosh, these guys are wasting Pentagon money on studying poltergeists. Well, no one was studying poltergeists. Colm and his colleagues were not there at the ranch to investigate ghosts. They were there to look at UFOs and to figure out the national security implications of where these things were from and the technology that was used. But in connection with that study, they inevitably came into contact with something else, something far weirder. They weren't investigating poltergeist. They were investigating things that were poltergeist-like, that just happened to be in the proximity to UFO events, and trying to understand the relationship there. People have a lot of fun with the hitchhiker idea, but it's real. It happened. It happened to all of us to one degree or another. People who spent a lot of time on the ranch took things home. I know for the first 10 years that I was visiting the property, I brought things home on purpose, rocks and bits and pieces of this and that, because I wanted to engage with it, and nothing happened to me until it did. It didn't happen to me, it happened to my wife. And I think the same thing had happened with Colm and with Robert Bigelow. And for others, who we describe in the book, we don't use their real names for others. I mean, it's 10, 12 years later, it's still happening to them. They don't like it. It's not something pleasant. It's not a funny little poltergeist that Casper the Ghost in their home. It's frightening. It's upsetting. It continues to sort of mess with their minds a full decade later. But it's real. It happened. And you're not going to figure out the UFO mystery until you figure out all different aspects of it. And that's one of them.